This is VOA Africa.
Good evening, I'm Esther Gidu-Ewart. It's Thursday, December 5th. This is Africa 54. Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni is criticized for leading a march against corruption. Joyful refugees return home from exile in the Democratic Republic of Congo to the Central African Republic. And the CEO of Kenya's flag air carrier pushes for government restructuring. We begin tonight in Uganda, where President Yoweri Museveni is being criticized for leading a march on Wednesday against corruption. The president's critics are dismissing the march as a publicity stunt. Uganda has one of the worst rankings in the world for graft, and activists are pointing fingers at the highest levels of government. Halima Thumani reports from Kampala.
Ugandan President Yoweri Museveni on Wednesday led hundreds of people in a march against corruption, calling corrupt people parasites who steal public wealth. Museveni said to end corruption, leaders must develop the economy.
Commercial agriculture, industry, services and job and ICT. Because that's how we can create jobs and wealth and income, so that our people do not have a material basis for acute need, which forces them to be corrupt.
But critics note that last year, Transparency International ranked Uganda as one of the most corrupt countries in Africa, below Kenya, Mauritania and Nigeria. Action Aid International Uganda says Museveni marching against corruption is ironic, as his government is to blame for much of it.
He is the chief law enforcement officer of Uganda. He is therefore the one whom the citizens are supposed to walk and show and demonstrate that they are angry about corruption. Now, to whom is he angry? So we really think that he's playing politics.
Critics accuse Uganda's Inspector General of only holding lower-level officials or private citizens to account for corruption. The inspector acknowledged that some top government officials hide behind Museveni, but argues the president is sincere in tackling corruption.
You see, when he says, I am ready to fight, it means he's ready to give them up. So that if you start looking for them, and to be true to him, if you are investigating a person who is near him, he doesn't say stop investigating. He says, bring me the evidence.
But Uganda's Deputy Speaker of Parliament, Jacob Oulanyah, says he is not convinced that corruption is now at the top of Museveni's agenda.
Unless we take this from our own front lines and extend the frontier to cover other areas, it's a waste of time. It's a public show for nothing. I come because it's a public show, but deep down I know we are going right back to practice the same damn corruption that we claim to fight.
Nonetheless, Uganda's lawmakers and judges Wednesday renewed public vows to be honest and not accept bribes. The anti-corruption events blocked all roads leading to central Kampala, forcing many skeptical passers-by to walk for over 6 kilometers to get to work. Halima Thumani for VOA News, Kampala.
Tragedy struck off the coast of Mauritania on Wednesday. At least 58 people drowned after a boat from Gambia carrying some 150 migrants sank, according to the Mauritanian Interior Ministry and United Nations Migration Agency. The vessel, which set out a week ago bound for Spain's Canary Islands, began running out of fuel and sank off the coast near the Mauritanian city of Nouadhibou. According to the International Organization for Migration, 83 survivors swam to the shore and are receiving assistance. A fourth group of Central African Republic refugees are back home, returning from exile in the Democratic Republic of Congo. The group are part of a first-ever voluntary repatriation program from DRC for around 172,000 people forcibly displaced from the Central African Republic since 2013. It was a joyous boat trip for the 200 refugees as they sank cheerfully from the moment the boat left the dock in DRC. The voluntary repatriation agreement was signed in July between the governments of the two countries and the UN Refugee Agency. They also met UN High Commissioner for Refugees, Filippo Grandi, during an official visit to the country.
In this moment, when we see refugees returning, we must remember that there are still many internally displaced in this country, and they too deserve the help of international assistance, as well as support from their own government. And there are also hundreds of thousands of refugees on the other side of this river, and also in Congo, Brazzaville, in Cameroon, in Chad, and in other countries who are also waiting for their day of return.
Over 1,400 refugees have returned so far. It is estimated that there are more than 600,000 Central African Republic refugees and at least 600,000 internally displaced civilians in a country of just under 4.7 million. That means more than 25% of the population fled their homes. As the Democratic Republic of Congo continues to struggle from a devastating Ebola outbreak, now comes the news that the nation is also dealing with a measles epidemic. The World Health Organization says the highly infectious disease has killed 5,000 people this year, mostly children under age 5. And since the start of 2019, there have been more than 250,000 suspected measles cases in the country. The WHO says that low immunization rates and high levels of malnutrition are fueling the epidemic and the higher mortality rates, especially in North Kivu province. Now, Cameroon is organizing a national vaccination campaign to stop a measles outbreak that has infected more than 3,000 people, especially children, in 2019. The most affected area is the nation's northern border with Nigeria and Chad, where 17 children have died this month. Health officials believe many more people are infected, since barely 30% of the population visits conventional health facilities. Now, for many people, their wedding day is something they dream about from a young age. But for hundreds of thousands of young girls across America, the thought of this day is more like a nightmare because of the continuing problem of child marriage. Anush Avetisian has our story, narrated here by Anna Rice.
Betrayed by my own family. This is how Freddie Reese, who grew up in an Orthodox Jewish community in Brooklyn, New York, described her 15 years living under an arranged marriage. After fighting to get a divorce and getting a degree against all odds and saving some money, Reese took her 2 daughters and ran away.
My family and my community shunned me. They still consider me dead more than a decade later.
Her experience turned Reese into an activist determined to fight against arranged, forced, and child marriage. She founded Unchained at Last, a New Jersey NGO that helps victims of child marriage. Since 2011, more than 550 people have managed to escape such marriages thanks to Reese. And in 2018, her efforts led to New Jersey becoming one of only 2 states to legally prohibit marriage for people under 18.
It's really shocking that when I first started doing this, marriage before the age of 18 was legal in all 50 U.S. states. The reason 18 is so crucial is because that's the age of adulthood. Before the age of 18, you simply don't have the rights that you need to protect yourself from a forced marriage.
In most U.S. states, young people are allowed to get married at the age of 16. 2 states allow marriages at 14, and 13 more states don't have an age requirement at all. Idaho has the highest child marriage rate in the country, with more than 4,000 such marriages taking place between 2000 and 2010. In 2019, Democrat Melissa Wintrow tried to raise the minimum age to 16, but failed.
With the history and conservative nature of this state, I proposed what I thought was a very reasonable compromise to at least set the floor at 16, which matches our age of consent and our statutory rape laws. In statute right now, It says that a child could be married with court approval. It says, quote, if it is in the best interest of society. And that is a huge indicator currently that basically a reflection of, I think, outdated values.
In 2019, Louisiana raised the minimum marriage age to 16, and the age difference between the spouses when one is underage cannot exceed 3 years. The Louisiana Family Forum was amongst those who opposed this change.
Here in Louisiana, we greatly value marriage, and we believe that marriage is an important institution. It's the bedrock of our country, of our culture, of our society, and it ensures and helps children for the rearing and nurturing of children. So we think marriage is a very, very important institution. The debate on the minimum marriage age took a kind of dark turn in the sense that it seemed to denigrate marriage.
Lawmakers and activists fighting against child marriages say the problem is deeper than just a debate about what makes a family.
If you look at the demographics of the kids getting married, I mean, they're white middle-class kids. This is our problem, and it is deeply rooted in a history of sexism in our country. I think it's pretty clear that it's a human rights violation because we have research about brain development, and kids are not ready to make lifelong, lasting decisions about their future.
For Reese, there is no debate about whether child marriages should be banned. After all, she says, the U.S. government condemns such traditions that exist in other countries, calling them violations of human rights. According to the data collected at Unchained at Last, more than 250,000 children got married between 2000 and 2010. The majority are underage girls marrying older men. For Anusha Vitisyan in Washington, Anna Rice, VOA News.
There's a new exhibition at the Smithsonian Museum of African Arts profiling heroes who embody principles of African greatness. VOA's Grace Oyenubi takes us to the show.
These forgotten histories cut across mid-century liberation independence struggle in Africa, telling stories of key heroic principles and people in Africa's arts and history, including former South African President Nelson Mandela, former Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah, celebrated author Chimamanda Adichie, renowned South African singer Miriam Makeba, and several others that might not be known internationally.
What this new technology allows us is for people to come into our spaces and they can see, if they wish, a traditional exhibition of truly exceptional objects, beautifully curated. But if you wish, you can, of course, read the labels for an additional layer of interpretation.
So what you'll see that we do through the high technology is that we connect each of those ideas, each of those objects, with a specific person in African history whose life can be said to be sort of emblematic of that particular idea.
Kesley Hayford says curator Kevin Dumochel and a team at the museum have developed a digital framework to enhance visitor experience by telling stories about the art and the histories that they represent. Dumochel said when he started this project 2 years ago, his focus was on the art of storytelling. He explains this latest exhibition.
What this exhibition does fundamentally is look at art and artists who are teaching us something about how to be the best version of ourselves. Each one of the objects that you'll see featured in Heroes is keyed to a specific, what I identify as a specific principle of heroic leadership. Empathy, dignity, justice, pride.
I would come into the gallery with my phone, walk up to it. After I say read, hold my phone up and you'll see this automatically appears. And what it is a title card, and then if I press or swipe, I get a video of Gus with captions, so you don't have to have headphones if you don't want. But I'm just going to tap through, and if you'd like, actually, you can take this phone and we can walk to another object and you can try this for yourself.
The exhibition opened to the public with nearly 50 artworks from more than 40 artists. Grace Oyenubi, VOA News, Washington.
We'll be right back.
Tell your neighbor, tell them say you there. Tell them say you there. Tell your neighbor, tell them say you there. Tell them say you there. This message na connected model of them. To the system.
I'm Clara Frank, and here's what's trending. A mobile app that provides virtual medical services is shaking up the game in Nigeria. It's the brainchild of entrepreneur and doctor Jay Chikezi, who launched it in 2018. Using smartphones, patients can schedule appointments and communicate with doctors via video, audio, or chat messaging. There are 289 doctors on call and 15,000 subscribers, who pay just under $3 a month for the service. Each doctor is paid a stipend per consultation, but for serious cases, users are advised to see a doctor in person. Next up, this simple device being tested by scientists could make a big difference to cassava farmers in East Africa. Because cassava is a staple food resource, any surplus is regarded as a blessing and shared with neighbors rather than being sold for cash. Viruses not only kill crops, they can leave people starving. The technology has allowed scientists to take their DNA labs out into the fields, so farmers can identify diseases quickly and tackle the problem before the crops are killed. The device was tested by scientists at Kenya's Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology and the University of Western Australia. And finally, London-based company Garçon Wines has redesigned its wine bottle to be more environmentally friendly, lower in transport costs, and able to fit through your letterbox. At just 63 grams, the flat bottle is 87% lighter than the average glass bottle, saving weight in the supply chain and ultimately leading to direct environmental and financial savings. The bottles use 100% recyclable plastic. The patented flat shape of the bottle allows them to be stackable, increasing the efficiency of wine transportation and cutting logistical costs and CO2 emissions by 60%. And that's what's trending today.
2 people were killed and a third person wounded Wednesday by a U.S. sailor at the Pearl Harbor Naval Shipyard in Hawaii. The shooting happened at a maintenance area for nuclear submarines, Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam. The combined Navy Air Force base where the shipyard is located was placed on lockdown for several hours after the shooting. Now, Rear Admiral Robert Chadwick says the sailor committed suicide. One witness told a local news station that he looked out of his office window after hearing the gunshots and saw 3 people on the ground, and then saw a man in a sailor's uniform shoot himself. Admiral Chadwick says there's no indication whether the shooting was random or deliberate. Saturday marks the 78th anniversary of the December 7th, 1941 Japanese air attack on Pearl Harbor that drew the United States into World War II. As the impeachment inquiry moves forward, U.S. President Donald Trump is defiant on Thursday, tweeting, quote, "If you're going to impeach me, do it now, fast, so we can have a fair trial in the Senate and so our country can get back to business," end of quote. Earlier, Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi addressed the nation and asked Congress to proceed with articles of impeachment, but the White House maintains that Trump has done nothing wrong. VOA congressional correspondent Catherine Gibson has more.
House Democrats say the evidence is clear. President Donald Trump withheld U.S. aid to Ukraine to benefit his own personal political interests.
He was willing to compromise our security and his office for personal political gain. It does not matter that President Trump got caught and ultimately released the funds that Ukraine so desperately needed. It matters that he enlisted a foreign government to intervene in our elections in the first place.
Nadler taking over the impeachment investigation, asking constitutional experts to determine if through those actions Trump violated his oath of office and should be impeached.
The abuse of office occurs when the president uses a feature of his power, the awesome power of his office, not to serve the interests of the American public, but to serve his personal, individual, partisan, electoral interests.
Abuse of power falls under high crimes and misdemeanors, cited as impeachable offenses in the U.S. Constitution, those experts said.
If what we're talking about is not impeachable, then nothing is impeachable. This is precisely the misconduct that the framers created a Constitution, including impeachment, to protect against.
But not all scholars on the panel agreed.
I believe this impeachment not only fails to satisfy the standard of past impeachments, but would create a dangerous precedent for future impeachments.
Republicans argued that Trump's concerns about Ukrainian corruption motivated his actions.
This is a country that he had deep concerns about from the beginning. Remember that he has concern about foreign aid, but this is one country in particular he had a lot of concerns about.
Trump questioned Democrats' motives for taking the serious step of impeachment.
These people, you almost question whether or not they love our country, and that's a very, very serious thing.
With the 2020 presidential election beginning early next year, Democrats say the need to act is urgent.
We don't have the benefit of time here when this president continues to ask foreign powers to involve themselves in our elections.
Well, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has not announced a timeline for a full House vote on articles of impeachment. Turley warned Democrats against impeaching too quickly.
You set an incredibly short period, demand a huge amount of information, and when the president goes to court, you then impeach him. Now, does that track with what you've heard about impeachment? Does that track with the rule of law that we talked about?
The House Judiciary Chairman is set to hold more hearings next week with a possible House vote on impeachment by the end of the month. Catherine Gibson, VOA News, Capitol Hill.
In today's installment of American Impeachment, VOA Steve Reddish explains the U.S. Senate's role in holding a trial.
The House and communication from
Once the House of Representatives passes articles of impeachment, it is the constitutional responsibility of the United States Senate to hold a trial. A guilty verdict means removal from office. And when it is the President of the United States being impeached, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over that trial.
Otherwise, it would be the Vice President presiding over the Senate, and he would have a conflict of interest.
Several members of the majority party of the House of Representatives serve as House managers. Their role? Prosecute the case for impeachment and removal from office. The impeached official is allowed representation to defend against the accusations. Members of the Senate sit as jurors, listening to the testimony from House managers, lawyers for the president, and any other witnesses presented. 2/3 of the Senate must vote guilty to remove from office.
For a president to be removed means that both parties, a significant part of both parties, have to agree to that.
A Senate trial for a U.S. president has happened just twice. They could not have been more different. President Andrew Johnson's trial lasted 11 raucous weeks in the spring of 1868. More than 40 witnesses testified. Senators delivered speeches in front of a gallery packed with overflow crowds. 11 articles of impeachment were sent forward. Just 3 went to a vote. Although a majority of the 54-member Senate voted to impeach Johnson, they fell 1 vote short of the 2/3 needed to convict and remove.
2/3 is really the phenomenal, or is the very large number you need to convict in the Senate.
President Bill Clinton's trial took place in a more politically divided Senate. Republicans had a majority but faced difficult re-election races ahead.
It came over to the Senate, and there was enough decency and goodwill on both sides so that the leadership of the Republican Party and the Democratic Party got together and said, we don't agree on the outcome, but can we agree on a dignified, appropriate process? and they could.
Senators decided on a streamlined process, hearing only from the House managers and Clinton's defense lawyers. Senators could only send questions to the Chief Justice, who read them aloud. After a 4-week trial, the Senate did not come close to the 2/3 needed to convict President Clinton.
Do you swear or affirm that
the House of Representatives is now considering whether to impeach President Donald Trump and send the charges to the Senate for trial. President Trump's party has the majority in the Senate. Steve Reddish, VOA News.
The Kenya Airways chief executive is urging authorities to move quickly to nationalize the national carrier as regional competitors seek to carve out a larger market share by pouring cash into their own national carriers. Serena Chaudhry reports.
It's the flag carrier airline of Kenya, flying with the slogan Pride of Africa. But Chief Executive Sebastian Mikosh says the government must move quickly to nationalize loss-making Kenya Airways, especially as regional competitors like Tanzania and Rwanda, eager to snap up part of the market share, pour cash into their national airlines.
KQ can be profitable, but I don't believe it can be profitable without investments. Because, you know, in this industry, if you want to have a dollarless costs, you need to invest $2. And I'm not talking about bringing billions of dollars for the fleet. No. I'm talking really about the things on the ground.
Lawmakers voted in July to renationalize Kenya Airways, hoping to follow the success of state-owned Ethiopian Airlines, now sub-Saharan Africa's biggest airline. Kenya Airways was privatized 20 years ago but sank into debt and losses after a failed expansion drive and a slump in travelers after a major terror attack. Mikosh said the airline was expecting an equity injection from the government to improve cash flow.
As an airline, we have a need of course, equity injection. We have a need of cash flow improvement, and we have a need of growing our market share.
Kenya Airways flies to 51 destinations globally, 43 of which are in Africa, according to the airline's website. Mikosh said the government will likely appoint a nationalization advisor by the end of the year, and the process should be completed in 2020.
That was Serena Chaudhry of Reuters with that report. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, have a good evening.